Hello, I'm Pamela Gavitt with DataGuard 365. We welcome you to today's podcast with Tim Porter. We are doing our series called The Voice of Early Warning, and Tim is an expert within security. He has been in the security and education sectors for well over a decade. He wears a number of hats. Tim is financial and risk services consultant. He's advanced school safety specialist, a certified active shooter trainer, and a former school district of Indianapolis's operations director. I got to know Tim well on a project we did together, implementing one of the first active shooter response alarms in Indianapolis proper for our school district there, and found out just how creative he is and quick on his feet. And we are just excited to have you with us today, Tim. Thank you for taking time.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you guys. Looking forward to this interview.
So, Tim, this is a timely subject because school administrators and college folks are really trying to figure out how to secure their students' data and improve and maintain the relationships they have with students and their parents. So we really look forward to hearing what you have to say about how they can enhance that and safeguard that data that is so important to their future, particularly with the online learning that's been demanded of the COVID that is encouraged. So let's go straight to the mat with key questions that we're hearing out in the market that people want answers to. You refer to the expanse of the internet by saying fences don't stop Wi-Fi. Would you elaborate on that a little bit?
I'd be more than happy to. In traditional security, we are taught to put up fences, literally walls, barriers, metal detectors, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, I have trained and been trained in active shooter events, for example. But when it comes to data and when it comes to Wi-Fi, it's a completely different story. Here's a great example for you. Okay, so this true life story. Believe it or not, I tell this story and I still laugh every time I hear it. I had a mother call me one day on the phone, and she said to me, she goes, "Tim, my son came to me with an interesting situation that he had." And she went on to explain that he had been stopped by a neighbor who lived adjacent to the school. This neighbor happened to be a taxi cab driver, and and he asked the student for the password for the Wi-Fi for the high school. Well, first of all, that tells me that he can get the Wi-Fi across the street, down the street, wherever he is. So he obviously sees the Wi-Fi signal coming in. The SSID is not hidden, or whatever thing's not turned off is not turned off. And he knows that there's Wi-Fi there. He wants the password. He even offers the student a ride for free. "I'll take you anywhere you want to go for free if you give me the password," which is a kid getting into a strange van is a whole nother conversation. But here's what's crazy about that is that he asked, and that the student, as I know the student well, and as a genuine person as he is, he actually had to stop and think. Now, he responded very well. He did not give the password out, and kudos to him. He's a great kid. But just the thought of this process that, is that now we've got somebody who's that bold to stop and ask a student on the street, who's willing to exchange goods or services to get something as simple as a password. What does that look like? Where can that go? What's that worst case? What's that worst case scenario? This is a very simple story, but when we're trained in security, we're trained to think, whether it's an active shooter, whether it's a fire, or whether it's data, we're trained to think in worst case scenario. So expand that out. What is the worst case scenario that could happen in a situation like this? Now, maybe this wasn't a malicious request. Maybe this guy just simply wanted to watch his Netflix. I don't know. But could it have gone farther? Could there be any type of malicious response to that, nefarious response? And I'm going to keep referring back to that, because worst case scenario is what's really important. And we've got to make sure that if we don't have a physical fence in place, we've got to make sure that we have some sort of artificial fence in place, okay, some AI fence in place, in order to make sure that we're protecting our data, our students, et cetera, et cetera.
True. Yeah. We know the web makes everything universal and without boundaries, but I think it's hard for youth and for adults to understand how far-reaching the grasp, how much damage can be done. Because cyber criminals, we know, are trolling the web, looking for that data, seizing it, and then selling it. And a password in the wrong hands can really wreak havoc. I remember that you have a number of cases. You've shared some of them with me over time. What about the chat room that the Indianapolis district students initiated? Can you share that with us?
Yeah, I do. This one actually happened on the West Coast, and I love this one. I refer to this as fourth graders gone wild. Okay, so at the beginning of this whole lockdown, we had there was a fourth grade class that was on the school system's version of Zoom. It wasn't Zoom or Teams or anything like that. It was whatever their internal stuff was, right? And so they had their internal thing, and they would get on and it would have class. They would have class every day. Well, these are fourth grade kids, okay? They're not exactly, they're not high schoolers, they're not college kids, but they're not first graders either. And they were missing their friends. And what they realized was that they could log on to this chat room anytime they wanted to. So they would get on in the evening. I'm sure they had great intentions of helping each other with their homework when they first jumped on. But what they wound up doing was a couple things. One, they wound up sucking the bandwidth dry from this location because they had spent so much time online. They were videoing, they were playing games, they were doing whatever fourth graders do. Now, again, let's just take this. It got noticed within several days, and so it got chopped really quick. But the issue here again is really simple: is what could go wrong there? What could go wrong there? And so we've got to remember that these are fourth graders. Some of them are more ambitious, some of them are more outgoing than others, some of them are less innocent than others. And if it could be anything from just simply hogging the bandwidth, okay, to kids doing things that kids shouldn't do on camera. And who knows what that is, but here's the question: if it's the school's network, okay, not only is that stuff happening, but who is liable at that point? Again, we've got to think worst case scenarios, and when we think worst case scenarios, if the school or the district or whoever provides access, then who becomes liable in that case? And again, please, I don't like to think worst case scenario. I hate it. I get in trouble with family members for thinking worst case scenario all the time. But I've been trained that way. And as data professionals, I know you're trained that way. And we've got to make sure that we don't put our company in a situation where we're liable for something, or worse yet, we actually allow something to happen that we don't want to make the 6 o'clock news.
Right. And I think the real downside of this, of the fourth graders gone wild, is that cyber criminals could have joined the fray. They could have posed as kids.
If it's that open, yeah, you're absolutely correct. If it's that open, you're absolutely correct.
And they could have actually, much worse than a bandwidth problem, brought down or interrupted operations altogether for the school, which is just what a school doesn't need with all the grading and all the timelines and all the things you have to hit, right? So what can you tell us about targets within the educational sector? I mean, is there a parallel between the young adults, or the kids, young adults, and then non-tech savvy adults? Do you see parallels there? I think you call them innocent and naive, but they're both ends of the spectrum, younger and older.
You're absolutely correct. And again, from a security standpoint, criminals look for soft targets, okay? And schools used to be one of the softest targets out of there. That's why, because nobody was suspecting everything, innocent children playing. Unfortunately, because we've had a lot of things bad happen at schools are no longer the soft targets that they are. And they still are in some cases, but what you see now is more things happening in the workplace from a traditional security and violence standpoint, because workplaces are now a softer target than schools are. Now, that soft target is very important to remember, because criminals look for soft targets, whether it's on whether it's online, okay, and whether it's an artificial soft target or whether it's a real life soft target, criminals are still looking for soft targets. In this case, you bring up two soft targets. The one is the naivete of a fourth grader. The other one is the naivete of an 80-year-old. And I'm sorry, being naive is not a bad thing. Okay, I don't want to act like, trust me, there's days I wish I still didn't know things that I know now. But the bottom line here is that you don't know what you don't know. Here's the similarities though as well. Okay, is that the fourth grader or the 80-something-year-old still has a tendency to say, oh, what happens if I push this button? And just because they think it's a safe thing to do. You know, I get emails today on a regular basis, and that are obviously some type of traditional phishing email. The problem is that these phishing emails, just one example out of many, get better and better and better. You know, I like to think I know what I'm doing. I like to think that I can detect these and figure them out. Of course, for me, the first thing I do is I go to the return address. But the issue still is what about the folks that aren't as schooled as you and I are? What about the folks that aren't in technology or security on a daily basis that are just living their lives? I mean, I worked with some of the most intelligent teachers in the world, but they weren't necessarily tech savvy, which is not a bad thing. I want people good at things other than tech, but that's where we come in, and that's where our job is to jump in. Is to jump in and help protect these folks, you know. And again, if things get transmitted across the internet and it winds up on your network, it winds up on your server, it winds up on somebody else's phone, it winds up on somebody else's computer, you know, you've got to remember this, that there is that possession is possession. And one of the things that I was taught in one of my security classes was that if you wind up with a inappropriate picture on your phone or on your laptop, however it gets there, technically you're still in possession. And even if you didn't mean for it to be there, somebody else put it there, you are now in possession. And the last thing I'll throw in with this is the social media platforms. We used to be able to block social media platforms just to kind of keep parents and grandparents and fourth graders from clicking on stuff they shouldn't click on. Well, in today's world, we're a different world now. Social media is now mainstream. And whether it's one of the traditional social medias or whether it's the more tech ones like Microsoft Teams or Zoom or whatever, it's still a form of social media, and we now have to these things now have to be allowed on the network. So it's no longer just blocking.
And you may not be able to block it.
Exactly.
That's
exactly.
the issue. You may not be able to block it.
Exactly. You're absolutely correct.
That in your file or your record or data lost forever. There are things that just are not irreversible, and we think that they are. We think everything can be fixed somehow. Either it's enough money that'll fix it or enough this or that. Not true with social media. I think the other challenge, if I have understood you right when we've talked about this, is that school is a place where people trust that because it has to do with children, we will somehow make sure they're safe. And even though that's everyone's true and pure intent, it is the very reason cyber criminals target it so hard, because it's so unsuspecting, or because both the students and the people protecting them feel like, well, we certainly must have, our IT team must have set that up to protect us. There must be controls in place. Of course, we wouldn't let that happen. And it's not because anybody intended to. It's because without the proper artificial intelligence tools, without 24/7 monitoring, without someone watching the shop 24/7 and being aware that, yes, even in a school where you should be able to trust that children are protected, these things are going to go on. Data is going to be attempted, they're going to try to take that data and misuse it. And that's unfortunate. That,
extremely so.
We should be able to trust that, shouldn't we? And yet schools are getting hit both physically and digitally in so many ways. So this leads to one more question. This is coming in from somebody watching from the audience about what school districts and universities are doing to ensure that when, not if, a cyber attack is recognized as an incoming breach, they can shut down the network until things are under control. So the data is not seized or held hostage for a ransom. What are schools doing about this, Tim?
Well, there's a couple important things to keep in mind, and one of the things is this: is that again, there's just all these parallels between traditional security and cybersecurity, and that is that in the event of a physical emergency at a building, there is an emergency gas valve shut off or an emergency electricity shut off. Okay. And so we really have to take that and transfer that, make sure that you're transferring that over into the cyber world. That's second nature for you and I. And I understand that's not second nature for everybody else, because we just don't think of, because just like you have a flow of electricity or you have a flow of gas coming in, natural gas coming into your school, you are a flow of water. You also have a flow of information. You have a flow of data. But the difference is the data is two-way, and so it's important in an absolute crazy emergency to be able to put an absolute stop to that. And so it's just, we just have to think about this. We have to think about this a little bit differently. And the thing is you can't turn everything off. Let me give you an example of how important it is to make sure that you finesse this type of switch, this type of on and off mode. Is that I've worked in a situation where we have had cameras inside, security cameras inside the school. By the way, all this technology is just going to get bigger and greater, and we haven't seen anything yet, okay, especially in education in schools, because online education is going to become the norm, not the exception. If it is in schools, you've got parents now that are advocating for cameras in the classrooms even. So there's a lot of stuff that's going to change, and you've got to be prepared for all that. Now, back to the situation for a second. Is it those cameras that I was talking about, those security cameras in this particular situation, they ran on a separate network, if you will. But the problem is it's still the same pipeline. Okay, it's still the same Wi-Fi signal. It's just that inside it's a different, it's a different virtual network. So in this situation, those cameras were also provided a feed to the police department or to the emergency responders, and it was set up that way on purpose so that in an emergency they could actually jump in and see the cameras. Heaven forbid something be going down. So the situation is how do we control this flow, this in and out control of information? And it has to be in a situation where we can make an instantaneous decision. Where schools do lockdowns. Okay, well that's great. Okay, but we also have to remember that schools have actually been locked down so hard that the police couldn't get in, literally. And a whole other conversation, but I've seen it and I know about it. So the question is how do we make sure, this is where we need the expertise that we have. Keep in mind, you're not only dealing with the nefarious criminals on the outside, okay, but you're dealing with kids who had their first smartphone at 6 years old. If they had their first smartphone at 6 years old, how much more advanced are they on the inside about getting information in and out than we are? Literally, I sat in one, I helped teach a class one time, helped teach an algebra class one time, and I was sitting there, and the kids knew I wasn't in the classroom all the time, so they decided to take advantage of me. And this child, freshman or sophomore in high school, decided to go in, and this is fairly easy to do, but they know how to go in, they know how to change the language on the computer screen, and they came over and they said, look at my computer, my screen doesn't say what you say. Well, they literally went in and changed the programming language on the computer screen, and thankfully I knew enough about what was going on to know what they had done. But that's just an example of we never know what we're up against at any point in time, and sometimes the best thing to do is to just cut the feed, like they say in network news. Because if we've got to be in a situation where we can detect, okay, we've got to be in a situation to stop it, we need to be able to stop it, and we have to be able to mitigate whatever happens. We have to be able to mitigate damages done, because it's pretty darn near impossible to not have any damages at all. We would prefer that to be the case, but we've got to be able to mitigate, because if you've got interrupted data, worst case seized data, or even worst case ransom data. You've got to be prepared. You've got to be prepared for anything. Like I said, you have to think worst case scenario, not because it's going to happen, but because that as cyber professionals is our job, and we have to be prepared for that. We have to be prepared for that worst case scenario.
Agreed. Yeah, we are doing ours to support that industry, the education one, and we are thrilled that you were on this today with us and gave us these insights, Tim, really. I think everyone watching this and who will see it in the future will also, have to admit that we want to protect our kids and we want them to continue getting furthering education, and online is a great way to do that. We just need to keep it safe. And those safeguards can and are in place. And it's one of the things that DataGuard lives to do, is to secure and safeguard people's data and do what you said, see it coming and mitigate so that the breach doesn't stop any kind of operations. The school and the university can continue to work freely and not have to worry about pulling the plug, stopping the feed, like you said, because we're able to stop it in good time. So that's our goal. I think, is there anything else that you want to leave us with? One last thought.
You know what? No, I think I've covered everything that I can think of right now. I just want to say thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity to plug in with a first-class organization like you guys, because it is so important that as we grow, that we're prepared for the cyber growth that we're experiencing. So thank you again for the opportunity.
You are so welcome. It's us that thanks. We are looking forward, for those watching today, with our October podcast. It'll be about the financial sector and how they are a true target. We've seen that left, right, and sideways. We'll look forward to seeing you again in October. For now, DataGuard signing off.